Discovering Your Purpose. That is the title of today's presentation, and this video, as you will see, connects to the presentation itself. Finding our purpose, and from the feedback that we got from those who are here and some of those who are not here, is that you're all very inquisitive. And so this is going to be a little intense presentation. It won't be very, very long, but it will take a little time, and we're going to go through lots of slides in order to try to come a little closer to that knowledge of our very selves, or our souls. And what is the purpose of life? What is our purpose? Why are we here? Well, let's start by seeing what some other people, wise people, have to say about this. For instance, here we see that the Buddha says that your purpose in life is to find your purpose and give your whole heart and soul to it. Anyway, no comment. It could be a little more purposeful explanation. And we also then have a great German philosopher who says that he who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. Does that mean anything to you? I've been making this presentation quite a few times. I haven't quite figured it out. And then Emerson, we've actually got something a little more, at least in my view, constructive. The purpose of life is not to be happy, it's to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. White on yellow is hard to read, especially when you're craning your neck. This is something, at least it has a certain amount of substance, but for me it was not really fully definitive. And for definition, therefore I thought, all right, let's see what the dictionary says. And here is the dictionary explanation of what it is. The reason for which something is done, created, or exists. The definition of purpose. The reason for which something is done, created, or exists. Okay, keep this in mind because we're going to be going along this definition. It's pretty good. I've changed the order over here to start off with the reason for which something is created, because everything starts with being created, exists, and is done. Okay, before we actually get to these three things, created, exists, and is done, or something that it does or acts, there's a very important element here that we need to talk about, and that important element is the something. And the something is us. We forgot to make one announcement, which was mobile telephones. We very much welcome all those who put their mobile telephones on silent, and will continue. So the something is actually us, because that's what we're talking about. Our purpose. What is our purpose in life? And, all right, created, exists, and does. So, why are we created? And we can start off with why we're created, but we can actually preclude this question by saying, actually, are we really created at all? And at this point, I am going to be taking a short straw vote as to who says we're created. Hands up. This is real we're going to be participating here. So I'm not calling anyone up on the stage, but I'm going to be asking for hands. Thank you. And who says we're not created? Okay, it's almost equal, and then we've got some abstentions as well. All right. So, but to really answer this question, we need a prerequisite. And that prerequisite to this something is that we need to answer a very existential question. Who are we? We're talking about, are we created or are we not created? But who are we talking about? When we talk about ourselves, what do we mean? And this is a philosophical principle. It's a spiritual principle. It's an existential principle that, for instance, in the Bhagavad-Gita, which you may know is sort of the philosophical basis of the videos that we present and the teachings upon which I base my life, starts with answering this question. And let's just go through a little exercise. So if we examine ourselves, we see that, we have a body. Everyone here certainly has a body, otherwise I wouldn't be seeing them. And aside from that, everyone's got a mind. And beyond the mind, we all have intelligence. There may be greater or lesser degrees of that intelligence, but we have all of these things. Excuse me, I forgot to press the button. And we can ask the question that, well, are these things who we are? And I am asking that question again. Everyone just sort of get ready with their arms. Are we, our body, our mind, our intelligence? Who says we are? Raise their hands. Okay, who says we are not? Raise their hands. Okay, now we really got a majority on the not, because this is a really spiritual group here. And yes, are we more than that? One thing is, well, we see that our body, our mind, and our intelligence changes. They all go through certain phases and stages of development. We've got a mysterious telephone over here that won't turn on and tell me what's going on or how many minutes I've gone up to now. I don't want to go over time. Our body changes, our mind changes, our intelligence changes. It's something that we know. You're all here, you're all adults, but at a certain point everyone was a child. Our bodies changed. Our way of thinking when we were young and our intelligence was immature as we went through educational systems, as we went through the whole process of experience that life gives us, we became more and more intelligent. So all of these things change. But at the same time, the question comes up is that, but do we change? Here we go, another question. Do we change? Who are those who thinks that we actually change? That we as persons change, okay? And who says that we don't change? And who didn't say anything? Because the majority didn't say. And it's a fact. Because we see that externally we have this change that's taking place, but another question, it actually comes up, that despite the fact that there's an external sense of change, there is a continuity on who we are. Our bodies changed, But aren't we the same person that we were when we were young children? And aren't we going to be the same persons that in 10 years from now, 20 years from now, hopefully everyone's here, 30, 40 years from now, aren't we going to be the same persons, although we look different, although we think different, although our intelligence may develop? So externally there's change, but there's something that doesn't change. The conclusion has to be that we are the ones who don't change. And thank you, 15 minutes, 50 seconds. We are the ones who don't change. And who is that we? We're still coming around to who is that we that we are talking about. If we identify that we with our body, mind, intelligence, you're on a real slippery slope. Because how can you constantly be something that's always changing? That would mean that we would be different all the time, which from a practical point doesn't work, because it would mean that you need a passport on a regular basis. You have to keep issuing new passports. For instance, every cell in this body changes every 7 years. That's not just this body, that's your bodies as well. So that means that physically we've changed, but we don't change our passports. Why? Because something doesn't change. And we know very well that when our mothers see us, even up to the time when I was 65 years old, my mother was 98 years old, I was still her little baby. And you try and convince her that I wasn't. And she still thinks I'm the same person, that yes, that was that little baby and that was that baby's body. I'm the same person 65 years later, despite so many changes that took place, one of which was that I became a Swami and I left my engineering career behind, and my mother didn't like that very much. My father was a little more passive about it. So there's something that doesn't change. And the thing that doesn't change, that something is a conscious entity, is ourselves. That person who is conscious of the change, who is also conscious of itself, ourselves. We're all conscious beings. And we're conscious that the body's always changing. We're conscious that we exist. We're conscious of ourselves. We're conscious of others. So this seat of consciousness, which you can't deny that exists, because otherwise we'd have to deny the fact that we're aware of each other and we're aware of ourselves. But of course, we wouldn't do that. Nonetheless, it's not something that you can create by chemical composition. It doesn't come from any type of material interaction. The seat of consciousness, the soul, is something that remains, that constant thing. And that is, when we talk about the we, that is the we. We are that thing that doesn't change. We're a conscious entity. That consciousness is reflected through our bodies. We feel, and information comes to us that it's cold in here. I hope you're not all uncomfortable, but it's quite cool in here, and we feel it. And we hear. You're looking at me, and I hope it's not a disappointing sight. So, and you're seeing me. Who's seeing? You're seeing with your eyes. Information is being projected onto your brain. That information is going, where's it going? Who's the seer? Who is conscious of what you see? Our eyes are like these spectacles. My spectacles don't see. Neither do my eyes see. There's someone who's conscious of that which it sees, And without consciousness, you can't see. You have to be aware of what you're seeing. So this seat of consciousness that pervades the body, that pervades our mind, that actually pervades our intelligence. I'm going to introduce a Sanskrit word, and we're going to learn 4 Sanskrit words today, and that's called the Atma. And in English, it's a pretty good word, soul. In Hungarian, not good word. There are other languages that really sort of reflect the spiritual nature. Others, it tends to become sort of a spiritualist type of thing. The essential, conscious source of life within us, which doesn't change, that is who we are. That is the we. And if we just review this, in other words, we see that despite so many physical changes that are going on, childhood, youth, old age, something very essential doesn't change, and that something is we. That something is who we are. So if we go along this line of logic, and is it all right? Am I going too fast? Is it? Everyone's really, really attentive, so I'm just really encouraged to move forward. 2 things are implied from this. One of them is that the Atma, or the soul, it existed before. It existed before the existence of this body, and it will also continue to exist in the future, because it's doing that right now. Changing body, change has another word. It has many words, but one word is also death. Death is also change. Where's my little child's body? It's dead. All those cells are dead. Thought process has changed. So in Sanskrit, in the Bhagavad-Gita, Krishna uses this philosophical or logical analysis. He says, tata dehantara praptir. In the way that the Atma, or the soul, goes through different changes throughout what we call this life, many bodies, so similarly, death is just another change. It came from before and after. From geometry, you know that if you have 2 parallel lines here, then they're parallel forever. So similarly, when we see that we experience the constancy of ourselves in this life through all kinds of change, the logical conclusion is that that change continues in the future, and that it also came here from the past. And the other conclusion is that actually we are not created. We've been existing forever, and we will continue to exist. Consciousness cannot be destroyed. Consciousness is existent in the past and existent in the future, and the seat of consciousness is also the same. So here, if we go back to our definition, that means the purpose of life then becomes the reason that we act and the reason that we exist. And there's an existential question here. I don't know if it's necessary to ask everyone, do we exist? Do we all agree on the fact that we exist? I think so. I won't even ask you to raise your hands. We should. And if we don't, then we have to have a chat afterwards. And although, since you don't exist, I may not be able to speak with you. But yes, but the question then becomes is, why do we exist? In other words, what is the inseparable nature of the self, of the Atma? We're existing, and we see that the world that we live in is a world of purpose. Nothing is happening by accident. Things have meaning. Our realms of science are constantly finding deeper and deeper meaning in the way that things happen, why things happen. When it comes to life, when it comes to who we are, it also has meaning. Although, sometimes it seems very meaningless. We're coming into this world, we're getting a good education, we're working very hard, and we're dying. And that very often sounds very meaningless. People go through, when they come to this conclusion, they become depressed. They don't see any real value to, well, what is that what it's all about? What's the struggle? Just ultimately to lose everything. There must be meaning to life. And similarly, there has to be something that is very much the indispensable nature of the self. And here's the second word. The previous word was, the first word was, what was the Sanskrit word for self? It was Atma. Thank you. And this second word is Dharma. And some of those ladies and gentlemen who are from Indian origin sitting in front, they well know this word, what Dharma means. And Dharma is a very interesting concept which really doesn't have a English equivalent, even conceptually. It's sometimes translated as religion or duty, but it's a little more than that. It's, for instance, you take water. The dharma of water is that it's liquid. You can't separate liquidity from water. In the same way, fire, heat, light is the dharma or the inseparable nature of fire. So let's just have a little think here. What is the reason for our existence? What is the inseparable nature of the conscious being? Now I'm going to take one-word answers that anyone can just throw out. What is our eternal nature? What is the inseparable nature or dharma of the self? Anyone? Salvation. Karma. Love. Doing good. Happiness. Okay, that's coming down the road. We're almost there. Desire, correct. Useful for people. It's getting warm. It's getting hot. Oh. You got it. Service. The dharma of the self is to serve. We have people who we say are quote unquote in the service. We have ladies and gentlemen here who are in the service. But there's more service than the military service. There's the parliamentary service. You're all serving somebody. We're serving our home. We're serving our children. Taking our dogs for a walk and we're serving our dogs. We have to serve our employer and we're doing our work there. Our life is actually a life of service. If you look around to all the interaction that we have with others, with each other, then it's all about service. And the only one that's not serving is this telephone who doesn't want to tell me how many minutes I've been talking. And that's because it's not conscious. And it doesn't have a soul. It's just a machine. And it shows how deficient artificial intelligence is. Because it's artificial. It's not the real thing. So maybe you can just bring us up to speed here, just so I don't go over time. So yes, we're serving. We serve each other. We serve ourselves. We do so many things to make ourselves look better, to look nicer, to look younger, and other necessities that are there, but in one sense they translate to a type of service. We serve other creatures, and hopefully we benefit others other than just the human race. We should be benefiting animals, and of course we're serving the world, or we should be serving the world around us, because we're taking a lot from the world, and we should give back at least as much as we take. And of course, ultimately, there's service to the Creator. And there may be those here of many faiths, or maybe even those who are not of faith, but recognize that everything has to come from something. Or everything has to come from a being, a supreme being. And we also serve that Creator. But there should be an order to this service, and at least from my perspective, let me just go through. It should start with service to the Creator. And there's a very nice example in this regard, because very often, for instance, humanists have the idea that no, we should just be serving man. We should be serving mankind. And sometimes some religions also propound that yes, God is best served when we serve each other. But if you take a tree as an example, and the root of the tree is the basis, is the foundation upon which a tree then grows and in which it is nurtured. Similarly, the Creator is the root of all existence. And as the root of all existence, everyone knows that we pour water on the root of a tree. You can do it on the leaves, you can do it on the flowers, you can do it on the fruit, but the tree is going to die. But when you pour it on the root, then all the nutrition and all the water goes to every other part of the tree. So similarly, service starts with the Creator, and then through this order, each other, other creatures, the world, and ultimately ourselves. But there's two types of service, and the service that we're talking about here is selfless service, not selfish service. Service that's done with a certain type of motivation for gain, for profit, for recognition, for name and fame. Type of service that ends up in conflict, it's ends up in exploitation, and we see that it ends up in pollution. In this world, we're manufacturing and creating so many things that end up becoming articles in which we're perhaps serving someone else, but in the meantime, we end up destroying the world in which we're living. We can't breathe the air, we can't drink the water, and ultimately, within a generation or 2 generations, this planet is not going to look like the really beautiful planet that it was certainly at this time. What to speak of in my childhood, it was a whole different world. So service also has a name, and service is called bhakti. And I think some of you have heard bhakti. Bhakti has become very sort of popular in the yoga universe. And bhakti actually means service. So if we go back to our definition, then we see that the reason for which we exist is to be of service. And this is the raison d'être. In French, they say, the reason for existence. Our nature is that we always serve. And so we're at the last part of our definition. You're all doing really wonderfully. You're participating, you're listening, everybody's wide awake. There's no telephones ringing. So it's a really progressive audience. What is the purpose for why we do things? and I'm going to be asking question, what is the essential motivation for everything that we do? Throw it out, one word. Okay, I mean, they got it right on the first go. I'm using a different word, but it's pleasure. And it's a fact. We do things because we want pleasure. No one wants to have the opposite of it. No one wants to suffer. We want some kind of happiness, satisfaction, pleasure. It's very interesting that the essence of the Vedas, which is called the Vedanta Sutra, and its accompanying Upanishads, make this sort of statement. In Sanskrit it says, Anandamaya Abhyasat, which means that we, all living entities, as well as the Supreme Being, is of the nature of pleasure, is pleasure-seeking. Very interesting phrase, pleasure-seeking. We all want pleasure. Of course, we have experience that our pleasure often ends up in distress and doesn't really give the type of results that we want. But that's another topic, a different topic. Therefore, as you see earlier in that little video, we're talking about just actually what does pleasure really mean? Do we know what pleasure is? But there is a word for that pleasure, and that pleasure is called ananda. So now we've got some Sanskrit terms. Atma means the self. Dharma means the very nature or the inseparable nature of our being. Ananda means bliss or happiness, and bhakti means service. Okay, you didn't think you were coming here for a Sanskrit lesson, but it was just included. So, Ananda, we're also Ananda. And if we follow our priorities for pleasure, then we can see that it should be like this. It shouldn't cause harm to others. It shouldn't harm our environment. It shouldn't cause me to fall off this stage. And it must satisfy ourselves, and it should satisfy others as well. So we're coming to the end, and my telephone is still not cooperating with me, but that's okay. It's about right time. If we put all this together then the purpose of life is we should be situated in the self, in the Atma. We should know who we are. Ladies and gentlemen, I spent 18 years in educational institutions. I've traveled broadly. I've given talks at universities mostly, but other educational places, colleges, and so on. Unfortunately, I've yet to be in a place that teaches people who they are. We teach people what we want them to be. What was that? Engineers, lawyers, and then so many other things, but we don't tell people who they are. And that's a real defect of the world that we live in. And this is one of the purposes of this presentation, that we really need to both know who we are and what to speak of courses that tell people and explain to people how to be good people in this world, how to be people who are ethically based, who have values, and who are more important in being good people than in being achievers. And that it's more important to give than it is to actually take. That's not a good economical foundation, unfortunately, and therefore you don't find it taught. But it needs to be there, and that's the purpose of our presentation here. So we need to actually, as we go back here, be situated in the self, to serve, and we need to give and enjoy pleasure. This is the bulk of presentation, but there has to be some kind of solution. And I'm only going to give a summary of that at the end of our talk, and I'll have a little demonstration here. I'll just be sitting here, and those who would like to talk more will talk more. But there's a science to all of this. There's a science to knowing who you are. There's a science of serving, a science of bhakti. There's a science of ananda, of what actually real pleasure means. Unfortunately, these words that we're using, pleasure, service, etc., don't necessarily reflect the type of experience and training that we've had in our lives. They are different things, just like love. So, love makes the world go around. We use that word very, very freely. But who really knows what love means? And who really knows how to love? Is it just that easy? Is love just some kind of emotion or sensation? There's a lot more to love. Love is something that, yes, people have to learn. Because it is more than a sensation. And one of the evidences for that is we see how so many people fall in love and they fall out of love. But that's not love. Because if you really fall in love, then you'll never fall out of it. If you fall into the right kind of love that we're talking about. My point here is that these things, there's a whole education behind these. I've been studying this for the last 50 years, and I've been also trying to teach it to others. I'm progressing. I'm trying to progress along this path to actually really learn what service is, to learn what pleasure is, to learn what love is, and to really know who I am, and to understand my real spiritual nature. And my search has been based, and my study has been based on certain very foundational principles that are able to be put to practice. And here are some of the elements of that science. Hearing spiritual truths from spiritually realized people. Spiritual education is a little different than education, other educational field, where people transmit information, but it doesn't matter what the caliber or the conduct of the teacher is. A telephone. And of course, I could have just looked at my watch. It would have been very easy as well. And it does matter what a teacher is like. And so hearing wisdom from people who are good, pure in conduct, realized in what they're teaching, well, we have this saying, you follow, you are what you teach. You don't just speak it, but you actually live it. And of course, meditation. In the last 20 years, meditation has really become very, very popular. Another way of translating meditation is thinking. There's also very few educational institutions that teach our youth to think. They give them information, but thinking is something else. And thinking deeply and understanding spiritual truths is also part of meditation, aside from just learning to focus your mind. And of course, worship, prayer, service, there are practical, scientific ways in which these are done. And the Bhagavad-Gita, where's the Bhagavad-Gita? Can you give me a copy? You had, I think, some copies here, if I'm right. And the Bhagavad-Gita is a very foundational, basic, philosophical text that teaches the essential truths of the self. And this is a science which is a eternal science. In addition to the truths of the Bhagavad-Gita, I brought actually, thank you, 10 copies of this lovely book, which is commented upon by my spiritual master. And I'm going to be gifting those 10 to 10 of our guests. And in addition to that, mantra meditation, the chanting of mantras, which has also become very, very popular, particularly the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra. These two things, transcendental knowledge and the experience of the transcendental sound, help us to actually understand ourselves better, the purpose of life, and give real value to why we are here, value that ultimately you can only realize by experience. One can get the information about it, one can hear about it, but you have to put it into practice in your own personal life. It's not the type of experiment that we do in a laboratory on, I don't know, some poor little guinea pig or in some test tubes, but it's an experiment that we have to do on ourselves. Self-realization is a practice that we do ourselves, and these two elements have been the main features within my life, the truths of the Bhagavad-Gita and the chanting. You've all been very wonderful. 47 minutes I've gone over, but the reason I've gone over is because this instrument is not doing what it's supposed to be doing, which is telling me the time. Thank you very much. My apologies. You've been really very, very wonderful. And for now, this concludes our talk.